Hey everybody, welcome to The Bottom Line. I'm Michael Noland. You know, the last time I reported on Don Henley, it seemed like Don Henley was ready to win his case. I brought up the fact that he was leaning on a 1979 Eagles contract to make his point. I also brought out that I found it very interesting that Don Henley even believed in contracts at this point, since he had a contract with a former Eagle member, Don Felder, and it was a contract that he chose or tried to choose to ignore, right along with his partner, Glenn Fry. They were bound and determined to kick out Don Felder, and contracts be damned. But here he is in court using a contract to make his point. Now, at some point during the case, Don Henley waived his attorney-client privileges, all right? And that's when this case turned against him, and we're gonna take a look at that tonight. All right, so what I wanted to do tonight is take a look at this article, all right? We're just gonna read a few phrases from it to give you an idea of what's going on with this case. Now, the article starts off by saying, prosecutors on Wednesday abruptly dropped the charges against 3 men accused of stealing handwritten lyrics from Don Henley after the band leader reportedly failed to disclose thousands of pages of evidence in time. Now, I'm imagining some of the paperwork are included in these contracts. If Don Henley was mentioning these contracts, why didn't he supply the opposite side with what they deserved legally? Well, it goes on to say the news came to light after Henley waived his attorney-client privilege. Why would he do that? I have no idea. That seemed like a bad idea right from the get-go, thus granting prosecutors access to 6,000 pages of previously undisclosed material. 6,000 pages on one particular item here, right? This is no simple rock band anymore. I've made my point many times. The Eagles are a corporation, and all paperwork concerning that band is corporate. Now, the judge, Curtis Farber, said of the case, he said, it is now clear that both witnesses and their lawyers, 2 of which also shielded themselves from thorough and complete cross-examination by relying on Mr. Henley's invocation, used the privilege to obfuscate and hide information that they believed would be damaging to their position, that the lyric sheets were stolen. Now, who's been accused of stealing these lyrics? Well, first of all, a rare books collector, Glenn Horowitz, and of course, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame would be involved in this, because one of the people being accused is the former Rock and Roll Hall of Fame curator, Craig Inciardi. And, of course, Edward Kaczynski, who was involved in the transaction. He's the one that set these things up for auction. Now, it's interesting here. If they had been found guilty of stealing these documents, each one of these gentlemen could have faced up to 4 years in prison. Which leads me to the 2 main focuses of this video. First of all, the men who are being accused of stealing these lyrics, and second of all, Don Henley's stance on this case. Now, the lyrics originally given to help aid in the writing of the Eagles story in book fashion lost their way along the lines and wound up with these 3 gentlemen. But the interesting thing here is the lack of evidence given to the other side, which is required, not supplied by Don Henley and his team. I wonder why. You see, it all goes back to that 1979 Eagles contract, a contract that I'm sure involved Don Felder in one way or another. I'm wondering if Don Henley just doesn't want that contract out in the public forum to be looked at closely. I think it would make him and his former partner Glenn Frey look bad in regard to how they handled the entire Don Felder affair. So I don't think his lack of providing the proper evidence was based on specifically these three gentlemen. Why do I say that? Well, I'll tell you why. First of all, these three gentlemen, in one fashion or another, together stole these lyrics. Remember, these lyrics contain handwritten notes during the Hotel California era by Don Henley himself. As a matter of morality, these notes belong to him. But to get them back, he's got to supply paperwork, and he's not doing that. As a matter of fact, you know what his lawyer said? They're going to take this case, rather, to civil trial. Exactly what losers do every time they lose a court case. Now, I'm not overly concerned about Don Henley here. This is a matter of right and wrong. I don't care for the guy myself. I always thought he was a bit of a whiner that hid behind the skirts of Glenn Frey, who was a natural loudmouth. I loved him for that. He was wrong half the time, but at least he had the guts to come out and say, look, this is why we're doing this is why we're doing that. I had more respect for Glenn Frey than I've ever had for Don Henley. Now, I love Don Henley as an artist, as a songwriter, as a singer. Hell, he's even a decent drummer. I had a couple of comments who said he was a Class B drummer. I think he's a Class A drummer. He's just not a Keith Moon or a John Bonham by any stretch of the imagination. But for the Eagles band, he was fine. He was great at doing his job, and the more he got off that drum throne, the less I liked them live. But it really just gets down to this. These are his personal notes. No matter what I think of Don Henley, he deserves to have his property back. But evidently, the only way he can get those lyrics back through a non-civil trial is to provide paperwork he's just not willing to do. And you've got to ask yourself, why? The only thing that I can possibly think of is this has got something to do with Don Felder. Now, for all this paperwork that seems to be missing, it's not just Don Henley that could be hiding stuff here. How about Irving Azoff, the asshole who manages the Eagles? You know, at one time, Irving was a great manager for that band. He represented them like they were his own beloved family. But there came a time when Irving took sides with the two predominant writers for the band. And of course, that was Glenn Frey and Don Henley. This was bad news for Don Felder, and even worse news for the band. Don Felder not only got kicked out of that band, illegally I might add, but he lost some very good friends over the entire ordeal. Now, I'm not talking about Glenn Frey, who hated his guts pretty much since the Senator Cranston episode, or even Don Henley, who probably didn't care for the guy right from the get-go, but he needed a couple of years to chit-chat with, Glenn Frey when nobody's there to really get his point across. But I would love to peruse that contract. There's something that Don Henley doesn't want coming to light. But that's the crazy world we live in today. If you can't prove it in court, then you are wrong, even though this is an obvious case of a man who lost his own personally written lyrics and notes of his own band. But the case was being looked at with a magnifying glass, wasn't it? Even bringing up a past episode in which a teenage, underaged fan overdosed at his home. What did he have to say? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll are not regulatory? You know what? This man has had his ass kissed time and time again by fans, as well as the uppity-ups in the music industry, and even the likes of Joe Walsh and Timothy B. Schmidt. They'll go along to get along. They don't care who gets hurt in the process. Now that's kind of hard for me to say. First of all, Timothy B. Schmidt stepped in at a critical time, and he's a wonderful bass player, a great vocalist, and songwriter. And Joe Walsh, well, he's one of my favorite guitarists in rock. But you know, it gets down to the individual character of each one of these people. This band currently has one leader and a bunch of replacements in it. There's only one true Eagle left in that band. Now, I know I've said this many times, but you always have to bring this up. Joe Walsh and Timothy B. Schmidt were never brought into the Eagles as full partners. Don Felder, however, was. All right, folks, so where do you stand on all of this? I stand in two places, kind of. First of all, I want the man to have his property back. Second of all, I'd love to take a look at this contract. All right, folks, that's the video for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please give me a thumbs up. That helps the YouTube algorithm better disperse the video to a wider audience. And if you're one of many viewers that have watched my video, but you haven't actually subscribed to the channel as of yet, it's so freaking easy. All you have to do is hit that subscribe to the tribe button, tap that top bell icon, and you'll be notified of all my future videos. All right, I'm Michael Noland. This is The Bottom Line, or at least as I see it. And together, folks, especially in the comments, you and I, we are the tribe.